Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the Slice of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. Today I'm joined by Yusuf Qasim, the president of payments at Zelis. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing, Jared?
I'm doing well. I'm pretty warm today for some reason. I need to not have a sweatshirt on, I think, at this point. I just kind of been rolling with it. But yeah, it's so if you see the beads of sweat dripping down my head, just disregard and just continue listening to Yusuf and watching what he's saying this whole time.
Yeah, well, maybe in the future with the metaverse, I'll wipe your forehead off or something. I don't know.
or like we'll have here's the problem with things that could happen with the metaverse. You could end up trying to do that and end up hitting me, just smacking, right?
Like I don't want to do that.
I watched. Meta had their they created this hand so you can feel touch and stuff now.
Yeah.
And I'm just if this thing if this thing instead of going slow just opens up, someone's gonna get hurt here. Who knows? But anyway,
more
I'm really
important
excited.
Things. I like payments more than metaverse. Just saying for now.
And that's what we're talking about today. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm super excited to get things rolling here. I'd love if we could start out if you could just give the audience a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk a little bit about Zelis and then some of the questions that we want to go through today.
Sure. So as you know, I'm Yusuf Qasim. I've really dabbled and got into payments really early on in my life. So I started my first company when I was 14, sold it when I was 16, and I've just never really stopped. I've just been an entrepreneur at heart. But I'm a self-taught coder and really started in more of the web and payment space. And just through some relationships and some other interactions, I dabbled into healthcare early on in my career as well. So I had to quickly learn healthcare. I knew a lot about payments in the web, but just through my entrepreneurial journey, I stumbled across, actually, it wasn't Zelis at the time. We actually started a company called PayPlus Solutions. So I'm the original co-founder of the payments division of Zelis, but that started about a decade ago. And it's just been an amazing, incredible ride ever since.
Yeah, it's you're definitely that's a really cool background that you're able to kind of you started in entrepreneurship super young. Definitely, I'm sure learning coding at an early age helped kind of drive that for you too, right? That's something I wish more teenagers and even younger than that would start getting into. I think it's no matter if you go into the operations side, right? It does not hurt to learn how to code. Being able to understand coding to the level that you can interact with the developers too, if you never actually develop, is such a it's such a huge skill. I tell everyone all the time, hey, if you're going to go to school for anything, either go for coding, go for UI, UX design, something, anything that's involved with the building of technology,
Yep.
Be in that.
No, listen, I'm just very fortunate that I was able to do that. And it's definitely transformed into all of the many different roles I've played within Zelis and leadership. But I wholeheartedly agree. When you can really start to understand things, you can start to solve some really cool problems. And when you have any form of developmental mindset, to your point, whether it's operational or you're looking to innovate or looking to change a process, you start to just think like that even for a second, and some really cool things can happen. And you just get to interact with your teams that way as well,
Absolutely. Well, Yusuf, if it's okay with you, I'd love you kind of give us the quick description of Zelis for those who aren't familiar with the company, and then we can kind of go through a couple of the things we wanted to touch upon today.
Sure. So we like to say at Zelis, we are the leading healthcare payments company, and we really work to price, explain, and pay healthcare for payers, provider, and healthcare consumers. Now, that is what I call the fancy tagline, but the real tagline is, healthcare has historically just probably been a little bit behind when it comes to call it the fintech or electronic payment experience. And when you think about sort of the rising cost of healthcare, when you think about just how much fraud, waste, and abuse that goes on in our ecosystem, it's just always been prime for innovation and just doing it a better way. And doing it a better way is through technology, but it's also through a lot of human beings and doing it with care. So every day we sort of just wake up and say, how can we simplify this process and sort of make it better and remove a lot of the friction, but also the costs and noise in the system.
And Can you already mentioned this a little bit, but I want to make sure we kind of maybe touch upon it in a little more detail because I'm sure a lot of people will be super curious. Can you kind of describe your role today? I know you started early with Zelis. Can you kind of talk us through like what your role exactly looks like today? Because I'm sure it looks a lot different than when you first started with Zelis.
Yeah, so my role is to really help oversee and drive the strategic direction for the business. And that's through obviously various functions. I have an incredible team of a little over 500 associates that are, just destined to really make a difference in terms of the healthcare payments ecosystem. So I am a strategy entrepreneur at heart. So when I wake up every day, I'm trying to always solve for how do we eliminate all of the paper in healthcare payments, because there is still roughly about a half $500 billion that still go out in paper. And Jared, I mean, you are an entrepreneur, you're a CEO at heart as well, but to think that there's still, $500 billion in healthcare payments flowing through a paper-based, it's a little sad, right? And it's just an area that we can continue to make a difference. So my job is to articulate and illustrate that problem and issue, find any and all ways through product innovation, through technology, right? Also through education and just making sure we're kind of chipping away at that. So I spend a lot of my day on strategy. Obviously, I lead a great team and a team of associates. I look to scale and grow the organization, but I'm also just making sure we're building more awareness in the marketplace for payers and providers in terms of the problem that's still at hand.
Absolutely. And this actually is going to tie into my next question, by the way. So that's why I wanted to understand your role. Can you talk us through a little bit, basically, what Zelis is currently doing around payments optimization in healthcare? Because I'm sure that's a big part of your role today, right? That's one of the big problems you're looking to continuously solve.
Yeah. So our problem started 10 years ago. And at that point, there was a portion of healthcare that was still doing a lot of electronic-based payments. So electronic payments existed even 10 years ago, right? And that was through traditional ACH. But it's evolved pretty significantly, not just through the volumes, but through the modalities. So what I can say is, we strive in actually connecting over 700 of our payer clients. So you think about all the insurance carriers in America to a little over 1 million providers, right? So we look at our payers as clients, but we also look as providers and clients. And I'd say phase one of that problem, which we're still in 10 years later, is just trying to electronify all that. And the reason why is it's not just, we won't hit nirvana when we hit 100% electronic penetration, because there are cascading constituents in healthcare that are also impacted by this. So the longer it takes and the harder it is to get the money and the data to providers, the more impacted those providers are. But more importantly, the more impacted we say members, providers say patients are also impacted, meaning there is a whole cycle to this, right? And in order for one to close out their process, the other one cannot start. And when you're using manual-paced processes that take 30, 60, 90 days, and then they're wrong, it creates a lot of friction in terms of us as human beings, right? So I get bills from, providers all day, and I see it happen. And sometimes I get them 6 months later, and it's because of all the paper-based and error and issues that happen, alongside of that. And that's really what we're trying to solve, because there are just cascading impacts by not solving, sort of what I would call problem or phase number one.
Now, talk us through a little bit about what's new or what's different about Zelis, I guess, as compared to others that are trying to solve this problem, because this is a big problem, right? It's one that we need to solve, and it's becoming even more important now than even ever before. It just the longer it goes on, right, it just becomes even more important.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things kind of happening all at once. I think there's a little bit of a demographic shift. So I think people all across different ages and demographics are becoming really good users and consumers of technology, right? So when you think about apps like Venmo or Zelle or PayPal, it's like everybody has some form of electronic payment to be able to receive now. And they're sort of becoming more demanding in terms of being able to get that acceleration or that sort of seamless experience. I think number two is there is a significant rising cost in healthcare, unfortunately, right? And I think when you have a convergence of not just demand or more technology sort of understanding or expertise, you just have this convergence kind of happening all at once. But I would say what's really changed for Zelis is all along the way, right, there are other like industries that are just doing some really cool things. I mean, payments and fintech has just blown up, right? You also then have the COVID factor where people really needed to electronify, like they weren't in offices dealing with paper. So you have a multi-pronged convergence of a bunch of different issues happening, which is allowing us to accelerate dramatically, the sort of the convergence of paper to electronic, which is great, right? So I think there's just a myriad of factors playing, but we also can move a lot quicker than we probably had done historically, knowing that we've been at this problem along the way. I think the second one is we're getting more sophisticated. So it's not just taking a paper-based payment and making it an ACH, right? There are so many nuances and so many complexities on the payment flows, but also the data flows. So while this convergence is happening, we actually have to make it better. Because again, I think people need to use the data a lot more eloquently. They're getting more sophisticated in being able to analyze this. So there's a lot more need, without getting into the weeds from a data and payment perspective, that we're also solving simultaneously. And I think that's the biggest difference, because it's not just what I would call the simplified ACH-based transaction.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I'm curious, how do you see the move towards basically paperless payments? Like, how do you see that, I guess, impacting healthcare moving forward?
Number one, it's going to get 10 times faster, right? Which makes everybody happier. Number two, I think it builds a lot more trust amongst all the parties involved. But number three, just to kind of give you an example, until a payer can pay a provider, what happens is the provider can't actually go, if and when actually connect and communicate to the member, or actually receive the remaining part from the member. So there are literally sort of key, I say, landmarks in the equation that until you solve one, you can't solve the other. So what I can say is at the end of this, or what I would call nirvana, is things are happening a lot more quicker. They're a lot more accurate. There's less noise, and everybody in the equation is just happier. So that is a big deal, right? I mean, healthcare has, historically been a little bit of a pain point for others, and there is a trust factor. And when you can increase satisfaction across constituents, when you can make things quicker, it has a much better outcome, right? All along the way.
100%. 100%. Yeah. I'm curious, what's next for Zelis?
So we just announced an amazing acquisition of a company called Sapphire. So you hear me talk a lot about payer and provider, but we really sort of double down on members. So we've always been in the member game, right? So a portion of the business within payments is we communicate to over 30 million healthcare consumers in terms of like their explanation of benefit or care. We also produce, millions of ID cards that, that you sort of carry around when you have to actually go to the doctor. But the reason why the member is so important to us is because of this, the assets that we've collected over the years within Zelis, right? And as I mentioned, there is a shift, not just from payer to provider, but members are becoming more aware of their healthcare journey. And, this asset was just a really exciting marquee for us to be able to sort of double down, and all of the things we're doing on payments from payer to provider, we can also help with the member. Right. And I think that's what's most exciting in terms of why we announced it, and sort of the things that we're working behind the scenes on and starting to connect them, into our ecosystem.
Well, I'm super excited that we were able to have you on first and foremost, but I would love to eventually have you on again soon, where we can kind of talk through some other areas. This is really the first episode on Zelis and kind of some of the problems that you're solving and just kind of what the industry looks like as a whole. So I'm really happy that we were able to have you on as a guest, and super excited to have you on again soon.
No, thank you, Jared. This is exciting. We could talk hours about Zelis and all the cool things we're doing, but I appreciate you inviting us on this and for the initial dialogue. It's something we're very passionate about, not just me, but I'd say every human in what we call zealot within the organization. There's just a lot of excitement and a lot of things we're doing to make a difference in the healthcare industry. So I appreciate it and welcome, not just for me or for others within the organization, to be able to participate in this podcast.